Late at night, an Airbus A330 carrying approximately 306 onboarders ran out of fuel. The lights had gone out and an unusual silence had replaced the engine's clatter. An intense moment for passengers and crew members as the aircraft begins roving down the ocean in the pitch dark. The pilots swiftly began to glide the aircraft as far as possible. At the same time, the flight attendants prepared the passengers for an emergency ditching in the ocean, possibly a death sentence for everyone on board. A real nightmare, you would think, a problem that never should have occurred in the first place. On the evening of August 23, 2001, about 293 passengers and 13 crew members boarded the Air Transat Airbus A330 at Pearson Airport in Toronto, Canada. They were headed for Lisbon, Portugal for a 7-hour journey. Most of these passengers were vacationers, looking forward to enjoying the warm summer weather of Portugal for a few weeks. Among the passengers also were Portuguese nationals heading back home. They had no idea that halfway across the Atlantic Ocean, a fundamental flaw in one of the engines would endanger them. Everything appeared to be fine on the exterior, so the passengers had no cause for concern. The Airbus A330 was a cutting-edge aircraft equipped with sophisticated banks of computers that could provide pilots with data from hundreds of onboard sensors. Its processors were entirely automated. This aircraft had solidified its claim as one of the safest in the skies since its inception 7 years previously. Meanwhile, the plane used for this journey was only 2 years old. 48-year-old Robert P. Shea was the aircraft's pilot, and he had 16,000 hours of expertise flying both land and seaplanes in the challenging terrain of northern Canada. Despite his experience, he had a very unusual background as an airline pilot. Before being employed by Air Transat, he'd already served time in prison for narcotics trafficking. First Officer Dirk Dieger, aged 28, joined him in the cockpit. He had flown for around 5,000 hours, 400 of which were on the A330. Despite having less experience than the captain, he had flown many different airplanes before this momentous day. Both pilots were the perfect candidates for the position because they had outstanding training and performance records with the airline. Now, were they? With all set and ready, the plane took off to a cruising altitude of 39,000 feet. It was 9 p.m. local time, and with the flight expected to last for about 7 hours, all passengers went to rest. Everything went smoothly for the first few hours, and the pilots didn't have much to do in the cockpit during the lengthy journey. Although there is no radar over the oceans, their responsibilities on the cruise list mostly involved comparing the fuel quantity to the flight plan, sending position reports to air traffic control, and keeping an eye on the aircraft's systems. Everything went according to plan for the A330's pilots for the first 4 hours. But just around 5 a.m. GMT, they became aware of an unexpected reading for engine number 2, located on the right side of the aircraft. Their computers told them that the oil temperature was low, the oil amount was low, and the oil pressure in the engine was high. The temperature of the engine oil would increase during flying. It does not decrease. The pilots, unfamiliar with this confluence of issues, consulted the manuals for potential explanations. However, the handbook couldn't help to address these problems. With all indications looking impossible to solve, the pilots radioed these complications to Air Transat's Maintenance Control Center in Mirabel, Quebec, back in Canada. A dispatcher said he would look into it and get back to them. The pilots had continued monitoring the passenger's cabin engine, checking for a fault, but they found nothing. At this point, all passengers were asleep, but they would soon be in a wild awakening. Around 5:30 a.m., an advisory warning appears on the ECAM, the cockpit's center display. The pilots checked the fuel page and discovered a fuel imbalance. Though odd, it should be easy to correct. Unfortunately, just 10 minutes after it was fixed, the instruments indicated that the fuel on board had gone below what was required to reach Lisbon. Things were heating up as they were already halfway over the water. The A330 now has only 7 tons of gasoline left, accounting for only 6% of its fuel capacity, and this appears to be dwindling far faster than normal. The captain had few choices regarding diversion plans, until he decided they were diverting to Elijah's airport on the island of TERCEIRA. In the cockpit, the captain reasoned that the cruising situation was dire if the fuel indicators were correct. Despite the significant rate of gasoline loss, the pilots were skeptical about a fuel leak. All indications showed that there had not been a fuel leak. There was no bang, noise, server disturbance, lightning strikes, or anything else that could have triggered it. Fuel leaks on passenger planes are so uncommon that neither pilot was trained to detect and deal with them. Furthermore, the pilot had previously concluded that the earlier indications about engine oil were most likely incorrect, and presumed that the fuel indications were also incorrect. They thought it was just a computer glitch producing incorrect findings. The pilots were right to believe that the engine oil and fuel imbalance indications were related. However, the unifying element explaining these issues was not a computer error, but a huge gasoline leak in the right-hand engine core. A vibrating hydraulic pipe deep inside engine number 2 had rubbed through the outer casing of a pipe, rupturing it and allowing massive amounts of fuel to shoot out into the engine. It explains the engine oil and fuel imbalance indications mentioned before. However, the pilots were so reluctant to this fact that they were preoccupied with talking to maintenance control, performing checklists, and organizing the diversion with the cabin crew and air control that they needed more time to rethink their knowledge of the situation. Despite being highly automated, the A330 lacked a fuel leak detection system. Therefore, the pilots could only monitor the gasoline loss rate in each tank. The pilots switched on the fuel pump on the right wing while turning off the fuel pump in the left wing, just in case of a gasoline leak. The airplane should have had 17 tons of fuel, but now only 4.8 tons were left. A crew member advised the captain to descend to 20,000 feet, but he declined because he thought it would be dangerous if there were actually a fuel leak. The right engine flamed up a few minutes later at around 6:13 a.m. The plane could still fly at 39,000 feet with just one engine, but the left engine also flamed up a few minutes later. With only 600 kilograms of gasoline remaining and around 240 kilometers from the airport, the pilots realized that they were actually in a life-or-death scenario. With all attempts to glide the plane to the airport proving difficult, the pilot instructed the flight attendant to prepare the 293 passengers for a ditching in the ocean, practically a death sentence for everyone. The captain, however, could glide the jet to the airport's runway with great difficulty. While coming down, the aircraft slammed hard into the runway. 8 of the 10 tires burst, and the plane bounced forward before crashing back down. The aircraft was exceptionally quick, without wing spoilers and no engine reverse thrust. Furthermore, the anti-skid system was malfunctioning, so when the captain slammed on the brakes, the wheels locked up and the big aircraft began to skid down the runway, its tires worn down to the rim. After considerable screeching, the aircraft skidded to a halt, with all 306 onboard passengers safe. Well, though the pilots were given an heroic welcome for having incurred zero loss over the longest glide in aviation history, questions arose a few days later about how the pilots ended up out of fuel over the Atlantic in the first place. Why didn't they trust their instruments? Well, this would be a story for another day. Thanks for watching, and do like and subscribe to this channel. Until next time, bye.